What's up everybody, it's Maddy Cosplay, and this is going to be my Raptorion Pharah build time-lapse tutorial and walkthrough. I didn't get great footage while I was building this costume, but I thought I would put together this little video anyways and kind of explain my process and how everything went and answer a few questions I've gotten about the costume. So I've been working on these pieces right here for the shoulder. I haven't patterned this yet. This is the only thing I haven't patterned. So what I do is I look at what the shape is like, the general shape. And of course it's not going to be exact because I can't just trace it on the computer and then print it out. So I get as close as I can by putting it on paper. And what I'll do is I'll take a ruler, I'll hold it up to my arm and say, okay, it needs to be about this wide relative to my arm and this long relative to my arm. I'll take a blank piece of paper, so I have a big roll right here, and I'll just make a square. And then using my ruler and kind of making little like grids and stuff, I can figure out how many inches in I want it to be, and I'll cut out holes and, you know, different things to figure out like what shape I want. And I can kind of just keep laying the pieces next to each other and seeing relative to the image over here what it should look like. And then what I'll do is I'll transfer this to foam, kind of like, you know, basics of transferring pattern on something, cutting it out. Bevel everything, I'll glue it together, and then once I actually have it together, I can see if it works or not. So that was my main process for patterning all these armor pieces. The only exception to that was the breastplate and the wings. And the wings I'll explain a little bit later. I have some footage of me building those. But for the breastplate, I actually used a duct tape form. So I covered myself in saran wrap and duct tape, and then using a Sharpie and the help of one of my friends, I was able to transfer the sizes of the pieces and kind of what the general shape should be onto the duct tape. And then I would transfer the duct tape pieces onto foam or to brown paper so that I could make a pattern out of it, and I would do it that way. I did end up having to make a few tweaks to the armor once I had cut out those patterns, but for the most part everything went pretty smoothly. So once I transferred those pieces together, I used barge cement to glue it together. I used an X-Acto knife to bevel my pieces as well as my Dremel to make sure all the angles were correct, and it ended up working out pretty well. So for the grill, I just cut out a few 1/4 inch pieces of EVA foam that were about 2 or 3 inches long each, depending on how big I needed it to be for the grill, and I beveled down the edges just kind of by eyeballing it and glued those on. The next step was to glue on the side pieces, and I ended up attaching these with barge as well. Because I didn't have Pepakura files for this costume, it was easier and harder to make this costume than you would think. The easy part was EVA foam, by the nature of its material, is pretty flexible, so if something wasn't quite right, I could adjust it pretty easily. I didn't usually have any problems with this. The hard part was it's very hard to conceptualize all these shapes because this costume's pretty geometric. It's not organic in the slightest, so I had a little bit of trouble making sure that these pieces were right, but by cutting out things and just re-gluing and using a process of trial and error and making some drafts, which I had to do for a lot of my armor pieces, I was able to finish everything and make sure it looked accurate. I'll pop in a picture of what the final breastplate looked like, and for the thighs, which are also in the picture, I used the same patterning process that I explained a little bit earlier on in the video. Because I was in a rush to make this, I finished literally the morning of the convention. I'm sure that every cosplayer has had an experience like this before, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I forgot to film a lot of this, so I didn't film any of the drafting for these wings, but I will explain it a little bit. So I took a picture directly from the game, and I actually printed it out using a website that I can't remember right now, but I will link it below and put the name on the screen right now. So I used that website and printed it out proportional to my body. I am about 5'9" or 5'10", so I don't actually remember how big the wings were, but yeah, I made sure that they worked on my body size, and I printed them out, and using that pattern I traced it onto tracing paper and then used those as patterns to transfer onto EVA foam. And once I beveled everything, the pieces turned out exactly the size I needed them. I glued all of these EVA foam pieces onto Sintra board, which is PVC board. It's really lightweight and pretty sturdy, but I did use a few extra pieces to make sure everything was sturdy. So I made sure that everything fit together before I put it on, because it'd be bad if it didn't. I used barge cement and some hot glue for this, just for some of the little extra raised details. For the wings, I made sure I was putting 2 coats of barge cement on the PVC board, because it tended to lift up a little bit, and I did have some problems with this later on while I was trying to finish everything up, but it turned out okay. And once I put the tops on, I was all done with the wings. I had to make sure to put the girls on too. I also forgot to film that. These are the shoes. They were pretty easy to make, and I also forgot to film building these. But I just folded a piece of paper in half and kind of traced on the design I wanted using a reference image like I showed you guys before. And I think they turned out pretty good. I'm going to make some tweaks to them, but they look pretty decent. Now, this is going to be me making the hands, and you guys can see here kind of the process I used for doing some of the armor pieces as well. So in the background you can see I have the reference of Pharah's hand, and I just put a piece of paper on my own hand, and using a Sharpie I was able to trace out the basic design, and I solidified it a little bit with a black Sharpie just to make everything was in the place I needed it. I cut this out and made sure once again that it fit my hand correctly, and it was onto transferring it onto foam. Pharah's knuckles I can't speak. Knuckles are kind of pointy, so I made a few small triangles to put over the knuckles, and I also made a diamond shape for the thumb and for the top of the hand. What I did for this is I cut out a little hole in the center where it would go, just so that I wasn't too bulky, and I hot glued it into place because I didn't feel like barging it, and it was a lot faster and easier. I did burn myself doing this, but you can't have a hot glue gun without hot glue gun burns, so it was worth it. I glued it on the top, and I also glued it underneath just to make sure it was extra stable, and after doing this on both sides, it was on to making the finger pieces, which I used 2mm foam for, and I just kind of eyeballed these. So this is how the hand turns out, and I'm pretty happy with it. I added some gold spandex underneath to add a little bit of a knuckle detail and just to give it a little extra pop, and I weathered it with a silver Sharpie. So these were all the foam pieces that were for the forearm. So I transferred all my brown paper patterns onto the foam twice, once for each side, and I beveled everything as I was cutting just to save me some time, because I didn't feel like dremeling every single edge of these pieces because there's a lot, and I was also running out of time. Like I think I mentioned before, I was cutting it really close on finishing, but after cutting foam for about 25 minutes straight, I got all the pieces out, and once I glued it together, it turned out a little something like this. So this is what all the armor looked like once I was done with the actual foam building. The building itself took over 200 hours, almost 300, just to make everything. That includes drafts. And the drafting itself took about 60 hours, I think, in total. This armor takes about 40 minutes to put on with the help of 2 people. The first time I put it on, it took almost an hour, but I got it down to about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how fast everything goes and how many people are helping me. Even though everything takes a long time to get on and off, it's actually really easy to move around in, which I was really happy with. I didn't have that much trouble getting around the convention center. I'm going to throw in a few photos of how the costume looked for Anime Expo, and thank you so much to the photographers who took pictures of me. I will link them below. Make sure to check them out, and be on the lookout for the next part of this video, which should be coming out within the next few weeks. I'll link that on my Instagram. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to me down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.